When Flash opens, choose ActionScript 3 to open up a new project. A good size for that project is probably about 800 pixels wide by about 600 pixels high, but it's up to you what size you use. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some extra layers to put all the content on I want. So I'm going to come down to the bottom here and I'm just going to add in maybe 5 layers. I'm going to name them so that I know what's going on them. So I'm going to put my actions in the top layer. I'm going to have a buttons layer. Okay, and as you can see, I've added a few extra ones in now. So buttons, text, drawings and templates. First thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to add into my library some templates that I've got from the internet. So there's nothing in there at the moment. I'm going to do File, Import, and I'm going to say Import to Library, and I'm going to find a couple of pictures that I'm going to use as templates. I just got these from Google Images. So there's the two I want to use. I'm going to use a picture of Bart Simpson and a picture of an elephant. So I'm going to grab both of those up and say Open. They pop into here, and what I want to do is I'm going to place those on my template timeline, and I'm going to use them to trace over. So I'm going to go to my very first key here on templates. In fact, I'm going to lock all of the templates apart from this one so I can't accidentally put it anywhere else, and I'm just going to drag out my picture of the elephant, and I'm going to put that on the timeline maybe by here, and I'm going to extend this out now to maybe 25 by pressing F5, and I'm going to make a new frame afterwards. I'm going to press F7, and where F7 is, I'm going to place my Bart Simpson. Now Bart's a bit bigger than I want him to be, so I'm going to basically use my free transform tool, hold down shift while I do this, and I'm going to make him a little bit smaller and position him a little bit further over. And the same thing, I'm going to take this out to about number 50 on the timeline and press F5 again to just extend that out. So I've got basically one keyframe there with an elephant in, one keyframe there with Bart Simpson in. Okay, before I go any further, I'm going to save because this project's unsaved at the moment. So I'm going to use my save as. I'm just going to call it Bart Tween for now. That'll do. Hit save. Now what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to trace over these images so that I can use them and use my own versions of them. So I can't use these pictures because they're the wrong type, but I can use them as templates for my drawings. So I'm going to lock my template layer so that I can't actually do any damage to it. And I'm going to unlock my drawings layer, and I'm going to go to the very first frame of it here, my keyframe, and I'm going to draw on this one. Now if I want to, just to make it look a bit easier, I can press my F5 and bring that out to here, but basically it's empty at the moment, there's nothing on there. So this is where I am. I want to draw over the top of this, so I'm going to zoom in maybe to about 200 so I can see it more clearly. That's what I want to trace over. Now it's up to me what colour pens. I might want to use a different colour other than black so I can see what I'm doing. But I'm basically going to use my brush tool over here, and I'm going to choose to make sure I've got two options for drawing modes. I've got one which is selected and one which is deselected. I want to use it deselected, so I don't want this to be highlighted. I'm going to choose a colour. I'm going to go for a blue colour maybe. Now my brush tool is set up. All I need to do is to very carefully trace the shape. Okay, so I've cheated a bit and I've jumped ahead on the recording, but what I can do now is if I, on my template layer, if I hide it, I can click between the two and I can see what my drawing looks like. And it's pretty much what I wanted it to be. I've just making sure that I haven't got any breaks in the line because I need to fill these things up now with different colours. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to do some colour fill. So I'm going to this time choose my bucket tool. When I'm in my bucket tool, I can change the colour. So if I want to fill my elephant with a kind of pinky colour, I'm going to choose a pink colour for fill, and I'm going to fill my elephant up with it by clicking into it. And if I want to make things like his eye and whatever different colours, I can just choose the colours that I'm interested in, and I can fill those shapes by clicking on them. Now I'm going to leave these other bits white, I think, but that's my elephant shape completed. I need to flick over now, and I'm going to do the same thing with my Bart Simpson. So I'm going to open that again so I can see it. Okay, so this time all I've got to do is move across. So there's my Bart Simpson. Now I'm going to leave him at this size because it's, in fact I might even make it a little bit bigger. I might go to maybe 250 so that I can see the lines more clearly. This one's more difficult to do And again, it's up to me what colour I use, but if you use a slightly different colour, so he's got a black outline, if I use a different colour to black to go round it, then that will probably make life a little bit easier for me. In fact, I'm actually going to go in and make that 300 so it's even easier for me to see. Okay. Okay, I need to make sure I'm actually drawing the right place, so I need to make myself a new keyframe there, because remember I'm working on M5 to continue that. I'm working on the drawings layer. I've still got my templates layer and everything else locked, so this is where I need to draw, and I've chosen a different colour. I'm doing this all very quickly. You can obviously take more time and care with yours. Okay, so I've jumped ahead again here. I've finished off his shape, and I can always check it by, again, if I hide the template layer, I can see that these are the new lines that I've drawn around it. What I want to be able to do now is to fill the colour in. Now, Bart's a bit more complicated than the elephant because there's more colours involved. But one thing I can do that's useful, I've still got the image of Bart here in my library. Okay, there's the elephant, there's my Bart. I can take the colours from here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my line drawing colour, and on my stroke, on my fill colour, I'm going to click on my fill colour, and then with the paint picker I can actually go and choose the colour. So I'm going to choose his kind of yellow of his head, use the paint bucket fill tool. I'm just going to fill in the various areas. Now on his head then, it didn't fill because there must be a gap in there somewhere, so I need to go back in a moment and check that and make sure there's no gaps in here. That's why it won't fill. Just check one other colour. We'll try his shirt as well. So I'm going to kick back on here, click on the red of his shirt, and I'm going to click there, and again you can see it filling in with the colour, and that's what I want to do. And again, there was a gap there. It obviously filled in where I didn't want it to fill in, so I'm going to do Control Z and go backwards, and I'm going to close up this little gap here and then fill it in again. Okay, there's one more place here. I can see his shorts won't fill up with the colour blue because there's a gap here at the top. If I zoom in slightly, you can see that gap. Where this is not joined up. So what I can do now, again, I'll go to my fill colour. This time I'll choose the same colour as the line. I'll go back to my brush tool and I'll join this gap up, make sure there's no gap any longer. Now assuming there's no gaps anywhere else on those shorts, all I should need to do, go back to my paint bucket tool, choose the right colour, which is the colour of his shorts. This time I should be able to fill it in with no problem. So now if I zoom it back out, we can see that Bart's pretty much finished, and if I switch here, you can see that this is my drawing now, not the original one. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how we actually do the morphing, how I make the elephant turn into Bart. So I'm going to basically go back to the beginning of this frame. I'm going to bring it all in so we can see it. So I'm going to say fit in window. So there's my elephant, and as I move my playhead across, there's Bart. So at the moment it's just flicking between pictures. I want it to actually morph from one into the other. So all I need to do is to go into this layer here and go into somewhere on the elephant drawing, and I right click and say create a shape tween, and you can see already it started doing it. And what will happen is now across this play it turns the elephant into Bart, and that's called shape tweening. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do the same thing using text. So I'm going to lock my my layer with Bart on now, and I'm going to come to the text layer which is above it, take the padlock off of that one, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go into the first frame and extend it out by pressing F5, and I'm going to take that until it's the same position, and I'm going to go to the end of that, and I'm going to press F7 to create a new blank frame, and I'm going to press F5 again to be able to move that out to the point where I've got another set of frames. I'm now going to use my text tool, so I'm going to come back into this first frame underneath where the elephant is, and I'm going to choose my text tool, and on my text tool in the properties I can change things like the colour. So I'm going to make this the same colour as my elephant, and I'm going to make the font size, we'll see what 30 looks like when I type it in. So I'm going to type in the word elephant. There's my word elephant, and I'm going to come over to here, and underneath Bart I'm going to choose the colour. So I'm going to choose the colour choose the text tool first, and I'm going to choose the red. So there's Bart. Okay, what I want to do now is I'm going to position these exactly where I want them to make them look a bit tidier. And with my elephant one, maybe I'll just move that a little bit. And I'm going to do something strange to them. I'm going to do what's called breaking apart. So I'm going to right click on them, and on right click, you can't see it on yours, so I'll do it from a different one. I'll go to modify instead, and I'll click break apart. And then I'm going to highlight them all using my selection tool, and I'm going to break them apart a second time. Now by doing this twice, I'm basically converting all those text into a drawing. So this is now an image like the elephant is. I'm going to do exactly the same thing using the word Bart. I'm going to modify and break apart. Then I'm going to select the whole lot, and I'm going to break apart again from modify. So now I've got two different images, and I can do the same thing. I can morph the one word into the other word. One thing I'm going to do first though, I'm going to put an extra frame in here. So I'm going to move the whole lot by shift selecting, and I'm going to move it across by one frame. And you'll see the reason for that in a minute, but I'm going to copy what's in this one by doing Control C, and I'm going to paste it in here using something called paste in place. So that basically I've got two copies of this word elephant, because I don't want it to tween until it starts to get to the second frame. Okay, and I might do that with the elephant as well afterwards, and you'll see why. Okay, exactly the same as I did with my my elephant. I'm going to tween my writing. Now if I don't want to see the elephant because it's confusing me, I'm just going to close that off for a minute. So I'm concentrating on the text. Somewhere in here I'm going to click, and I'm going to add a shape tween. Okay, so now you can see how bizarre looking that is, but this is why I've added the extra framing, because I didn't want it to start morphing on frame 1, because I'm going to have a button action on there. But as we move across now, it morphs the words across to form the word Bart. Okay, so I've got two different actions going on. If I switch this one back so I can see both happening at the same time. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make my own button. So instead of bringing a button in from the library, I'm actually going to make a button. So I can make a button any shape I want. So I'm going to lock my text layer as well now, and I'm going to move on to my buttons layer. Now my buttons layer, I'm going to make this extend all the way out across the whole thing by pressing F5, and I'm going to put my button on the first frame of there, but I haven't got a button yet, so I'm going to actually design one. So I'm going to go back to my paintbrush tool. I'm going to choose a color, maybe a green kind of color this time will do, and I'm going to draw myself a button shape. Doesn't really matter what the shape is. There's my weird little button, and I'm going to fill that with a different color. So I'm going to choose another color from my drop down, maybe a pinky kind of color, fill that in. I'm going to turn that into a button. How do I do that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it first of all. Now remember, this is the only thing on this layer at the moment. I'm going to select that, and whilst it's selected I'm going to press F8, and I'm going to turn it into a button symbol. So I need to make sure from these choices I've got button ticked, and I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this one okay, I'm just going to call this Bart button or something like that. So BART underscore BTN for button, and say OK. And here where in the properties now it's asking me for a name for the instance of that button. I'm just going to call it Bart Go. So that's the name of the instance of that button, and we need that for the code afterwards to actually make the button work. However, what we can do now is we can change how the button looks when we click on it. So if we double click on this button now, we go inside it. So if it's got, the button itself has got its own layers inside. So at the moment you can see it says up, over, down and hit. They're the states of the button depending on what the mouse is doing. So up is what it looks like normally, over is what it looks like when the mouse hovers over it, and down is what it looks like when we actually click the button. So we can change these colors quite easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press F6 to duplicate what's inside, and I'm going to do that a second time. So at the moment all that's showing me is that this button is the same color in all three states. I'm going to go to the second one, the over, and I'm going to change the fill color. So instead of that fill color being pink, okay, as it is now, I'm going to change this color up here and make it a different color. So let's try making that into a light green. Okay, and I'm going to go over to the down state, and I'm going to do the same thing. You see I'm clicking off it and clicking in it, so I'm only changing the inner fill rather than the stroke as well. And I'm going to change it again. This time I'll make it a yellow color. So there's my three different stages of my of my button, and I can test it. If I go click back and go out of it again to scene 1, when I actually run this now as a test by doing Control and Enter, okay, there's the button, and you can see as I hover over it, it changes colour. Forget the fact that the morph is going on at the same time, but this is what I'm doing here. So what I want to do now is I want to add a little bit of text to it, so I know what it actually is, that I know it's a button. So I'm going to go back into it again by double clicking, and when I'm in there now, on my first frame there, I'm going to copy my text, use my text tool, come up here, and I'm going to type in press me. Okay, and I'm going to make my font color black so I can see it, and then I'm going to use my sizing tool, and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so it fits inside my button. Now if I wanted to, I can add that press me to the other stages of the button as well. I'm not going to for now. I'm just going to come back out of it again, scene 1. So there's my button that says press me. Okay, so I'm going to now add some ActionScript code to make my button work, and we're going to do this the same way as we did it before. In fact, I've even got my other one up here. This is one from earlier, and if I go into my actions layer and I find my actions there, I can see how it's laid out. I've got my label on the second frame, and in my first frame I've got all the actions, and this is the ActionScript code. So I'm going to copy this same code here, and when I'm doing that, I'm going to paste it then into my new one. So I'm going to go into Bart, go back to my timeline, go to the first frame here, and in that first frame I'm going to make sure it's unlocked, go into the actions layer, and I'm going to paste that in. Now at the moment some of the actual text, the names are wrong because they're not the same as my elephant one, so I'm going to change those in a moment. But before I do that, I'm going to go back to my timeline, I'm going to go to the second frame, I'm going to press F7 to make a new frame, and I'm going to extend that one out to the end by pressing F5, and all I'm going to do in here is I'm going to add my label. So this is the point that it's going to jump to. So I'm going to add my label, and I'm going to call my label Bart Start. That's the name of my label. So I'm going to go back into my ActionScript code now, and I need to change my the label it jumps to, which is here, and call it Bart Start. I probably should have called it Bart Label, but I didn't do that. Now I need to remember the names that I use for these other things. So this one, it doesn't matter what I call it. So I'm just going to call it Go Bart, as long as I use the same name up here, and call this one the same thing. This is just the name that I've called this little procedure. The other thing I need to know is the name of my button. Now if I can't remember the name of my button, all I need to do is to go back to it, and when I'm on it, in the properties of my button, I can see it's called Bart Go. So I'm going to come back into my actions, go back to where this one is, and my button is called Bart Go. Now if that's all correct, I should be able to play it and it should work. Let's try it out. Okay, and there we have it. And because there's a stop in the first line of the code, what happens is it runs through that animation and then goes back to the first keyframe again, and it's waiting for the button to be pressed a second time. Okay, the last thing you want to do before you actually output this now as your movie is you probably want to remove this templates layer, because occasionally the images from the templates end up coming through on your Swift file, and you don't want that. So we're going to click on the templates layer, and we're going to just delete it by hitting the rubbish bin. So now this is the full project. This is all the things we want. We've got our action script, we've got our label for our button, we've got our button on this layer, our text which is morphing on this layer, remembering that we've got a single frame for both of those which just show the drawing and the name before the morphing starts. Then we've got the morphing going through. We can still just check it going through like this. When we're happy, now we can create our finished Swift by doing Control and Enter. That'll produce the one that we want, which hopefully works fine, and that's what you need to submit along with your FLAR file. Good luck.